dance, America, America. God midnight every floor, confirm your soul through self-control, thy liberty in law. Oh, beautiful for heroes brood in liberating shrine, who mourns their country love and mercy more than life. Oh, America, America. God, that go to refine dear love success, be nobleness and every gain divine. Oh, beautiful for patriot dream that's seen beyond the years, that alabaster cities gleam undimmed by human tears. Oh, America, America, God shed his grace on thee, crown thy good with brotherhood, with family, with sisterhood, with community, with you and me. From sea to shining sea.
Do you think that that African American people who fled the South were able to maintain some part of their Southern culture as they moved into other parts of the world and other parts of this country?
The people who were part of the Great Migration were Southerners first and foremost, and when they raised their children, they brought that culture with them. One of the things they did not do is they often did not tell their children the stories of what they had endured, and anyone who's tried to talk with their parents or grandparents or great-grandparents about what had happened has probably run into the resistance to talk about all that they had endured. I think many of them have suffered post-traumatic stress as a result of the world that they had to flee. On the other,
I'm one.
on the other, yes. On the other hand, though, they did impart values and a wisdom and a kind of traditionalism, religiosity, a sense of survival ability that I think we often don't take note of it because they're not actually speaking of it. They're acting it and they're doing it, and their very survival, I think, should be an inspiration to all of us. These people, by their actions, ended up changing the region that they had been forced to flee. That is power, and that's one of the unspoken narratives that often gets lost when we talk about something as important as the Emancipation Proclamation. Yes, there was an Emancipation Proclamation on January 1st, 1863, and yes, there were the 13th and 14th Amendments, but they were not honored, and so life, in fact, became so much worse for the children and the grandchildren, the great-grandchildren of slavery. And it wasn't until 6 million people actually voted with their feet, and those who actually stayed marched and protested, finally, for things to change, did things actually change. And thus, these people ended up changing the very region that they'd been forced to flee. These people were actually able to do what the Emancipation Proclamation on the day that it was signed could not do. They were able to do what the president himself alone at that time could not do. They were able to do what both houses of Congress could not or would not truly do, and that is they freed themselves. They freed themselves. And I think that is a sense of, that is, I think, the most inspiring aspect of all of this.
I got the Times every Sunday, and those of you who are looking for jobs sometimes, you know how they say respond to New York Times XZW 1, 2, 4, 5, 6, whatever, and send your CV and a sample of your writing, and I did that. Well, a week later, I got a telegram. Now, I know they don't send, for you young people, you say, what is a telegram, right? There was once upon a time a telegram where they rang your doorbell and handed you this little yellow thing, and I opened it, and it says, report to work on Monday. Well, I got in my father's face, held up the telegram and said, see, I can get a job writing someplace, because they wanted someone to write for the firm. And my father just looked at me and said, because he came from the South, you know. He's a Southern black man, really, although he lived all these years in New York City. And he said, well, you're still going to be teaching in September. But I put on my blue suit, my blue shoes, I had my blue bag, my white gloves, and my blue hat. And I went down. They said, show up at 9, and I got there at 8:30 because I figured I couldn't do CP time, you know, for this job. So I got there at 8:30, and in comes the receptionist, and she looks at me as she opens the door, and I took out the telegram, and I said, here, have you ever had someone look at something and then look at you, and then look at something, and then look at you? She did it 3 times, and I'm smiling all the time, and she said, come in, sit down. And she goes out, and there must have been another entrance in that office, because she goes out, and she's gone for about 10 minutes, and she sits back down, takes the thing off her typewriter, and she begins to work. And then a head came around like this, right? And, you know, I smiled real fast, and another head came around like that. At 10 minutes to 9, a guy walked out and said, I'm sorry, the job is taken. I said, oh, no. Well, you know, coming from New York, I decided to use my New York humor. I said, I know what, I got here too early. I said, I'm going to go outside and come back at 9 o'clock, because the telegram said, report to work at 9 a.m. So I know I'm early. I'll go back outside, wait till 9 a.m. and come back in, and everything will be okay. The guy never laughed, smiled, whatever. But I handed him the telegram. Again, he did the same thing. He looked at the telegram. He looked at me. I mean, the whole thing was like, how in the world did this happen? And he said, the job is taken. And so he turned his back and walked away down the hallway. And I said, I know. It's discrimination. I'm going to report you to the Urban League. And he turned around and looked at me and just shrugged, right? And I took my hat off, my gloves off, and got on the subway. Those of you from New York know that if you're downtown and you want to really stay on the west side, you've got to stay on and make sure you take the number 1 train. But I was so mad, it got to 96, I'm still sitting there, and the door closes, I'm on the number 2 or number 3, and all of a sudden it starts doing that shaking thing, and you know you're going to the east side. So I get off at 135th Street. I cross Lenox Avenue, and there's a guy outside about a quarter into the block, 135th Street, smoking a cigarette, and there was this thing that says, Schaumburg. And I said to him, what's the Schaumburg? He said, lady, if you want to know, go inside, sign in. So the old Schaumburg had the book that you sign in almost right outside the door. And I walked inside, and when you walked into that old Schaumburg, there's this long table, and all these men were just sitting there, head down, writing, books stacked up all on that table. And there was a glass compartment there, Miss Jean Hudson. I knocked on the glass door, and she opened the door. She said, yes, dear, gentlewoman. I said, what is the Schaumburg? She said, oh, my dear. She said, this library has books only by and about black people. And I, with my smart 20-year-old mouth, said, there must not be many books in here. Whenever I brought my classes to the Schaumburg, which was every semester, she would look at me with that very sly smile, right? And say, I have an interesting story to tell about your professor. And she told that story.
A lot of people are like, well, at least Greta is bringing all this attention to our movement. But then also a lot of people are like, but that attention needs to be trickling down to the communities that need it and whose stories need to be uplifted. And I think we see, like, you know, in the example of the Parkland students and March for Our Lives and the example of the climate movement right now, it's that there's been Black and brown youth and Indigenous youth talking about these issues for a really long time because it affects us on the bottom line every day, like you were saying.
Right,
Quality
it's not
of
like
life,
this idea coming to you. It's like in your body all day, every day.
And that's why so many of us have a lot of the solutions and have a lot of the voices that need to be uplifted when talking about these issues, when talking about gun violence or when talking about climate change. But there's just not that space for that because that's not the story the media is interested in. The media is interested in whoever's being like idolized in the moment, and then in a few weeks they're gonna forget about all the millions of people who don't look anything like Greta, but who are actually suffering, losing land, culture, existence.
Morning,
Have you anything to say to me? Can you tell me where my love can be? Is there a meadow in the mist where someone's waiting to be kissed? Skylark, have you seen a valley green with spring, where my heart can go a journeying over the meadow in the midst to a blossom-colored lane? And in your lonely flight, haven't you heard the music in the night? Beautiful music, strange as the will of the mist, crazy as a loon, sad as a gypsy, serenading the moon. Skylark, I don't know if you can find these things, but my heart is riding on your wings. So if you see them anywhere, won't you leave me there?
The conditions of solitary can damage anyone. But for children and teenagers, they are especially destructive and immoral. Next up, you will hear firsthand the effects of solitary on our youth. Mark.
I was 17. 2 officers escorted me, cuffed, into the new housing unit that was called Administrative Segregation Unit, which was ADSEG for short, but isolated confinement. They took me into a cage-like holding cell, and I noticed 2 things. When I looked up, I noticed that 70% of the housing population there could see me. The officers then proceeded to strip search me. So I was naked, and I stood naked as the officers transferred me over officially. And while I was standing naked, facing 70% of the view of people there was a loud, chaotic hum. People were yelling, but they weren't yelling anything. They weren't rambling or babbling. They were trying to make a human connection with me. And because the officers don't want to hear human connections being made, they turned on an industrial-sized fan. And in this fan, the fan is already loud. It's a very loud humming noise. The officers take a newspaper, probably about this thick, stuff it in the back of the fan. So it makes a loud smacking sound that goes over top of the yelling of human connections trying to be made to my naked body. And then the officers transfer me over. Now, before they transferred me into my holding cell, my isolated confinement unit, someone said, "Yo, Sarge, are we supposed to put him in a room with somebody? I think he's a juvenile." The Sarge said, "Put him in the room by his fucking self." So they put me in the room by myself. While I was in solitary confinement, I thought twice about what I was supposed to be doing, which was high school. I was 17. Because that was ignored on all fronts of my education, my academic progress was completely stopped right then and there. I went through various mental breakdowns, and my mind deteriorated as I sat alone in an isolated cell by myself, a little smaller than this box I'm standing in now. The only human connection I eventually made was my neighbor. You see, the cells have cracks, large cracks in the walls, so we can slide our fingers to the back part and make the little bare human connection that we possibly can. A desire for a humane relation in an inhumane circumstance. I don't even know whose hand it was just white. And all I remember is he probably heard me crying, having a mental breakdown, and say, "Yo, bro, you need some cigarettes?" And I was like, "Hell yeah, I need some cigarettes." And he gave me half a pack of cigarettes for 2 Reese's Buttercups, which you may not know this, but it's a lot. And we held conversations, and we had a human relationship. I do not know whose hand that was. Afterwards, I realized that I needed to bring myself and get myself together. And I tried to do this by having a regular rest schedule, which was difficult. You see, that loud, chaotic hum was incessant, constant, and consistent with being a part of ASEG and sleeping there in this isolated, confined cell. So I would tie a sweater around a pillow and then around my head after my ears were stuffed with toilet paper because I couldn't sleep. And no matter how cold it was, I would tie a sweater around a pillow around my head with tissue stuffed in my ears. Some people ask me, what was your family doing? Or what did they think about it? And you know what? I didn't have a family that necessarily wanted to speak to me every single day, but they wanted to speak to me once a month at least. No one knew where I was at for 2 months. A mother didn't know where her son was at. My mother didn't know where her son was at. A grandmother didn't know where her son was at. My nana didn't know where her son was at. For 2 months, at least. I don't remember. It's traumatic to think about. To this day, I wrap a sweater around a pillow around my head to go to bed.
Why is art the most powerful medium to tell that in those stories?
Because art is the forum that moves people's humanity, which then can move their intellect and move them in spirit to then act on those things in policy. Laws can only limit people's behavior. Art can actually change people's hearts and minds. That's the difference. You know, those rednecks who were lynching people said, "Oh man, you know, now they got these civil rights laws that stop me. You know, I can't do it anymore." That doesn't take away that desire to kill young black men, right? But then you take someone like Louis Armstrong, who played in a roadhouse in Texas, was seen by a young white teenager who had never seen genius in the form of a black man.
Some of the things that I learned about is when we had these spaces where at the end of the day, when we had like, I guess washing mace out of our eyes, it was like, okay, so like, not how was that experience, but how often does this happen to us? And one of the things I learned and kind of stumbled upon was that Black folk in particular are under the reign of police as an agency and an infrastructure. The same way that Eric Garner was strangled, Black folk in this country continue to be strangled by a regime that is not held accountable, and the only people being sent to jail are the people recording it. And so people who are onlookers of these experiences are oftentimes the ones being thrown in jail. And oftentimes we don't find where police are in fact being held accountable. And one of the reasons that I found that out through I went back to Georgetown. I was like, okay, so if I have to do this studying thing, I want to learn more about this. And this little bit of chunk of work turned into this grave obsession about solving the problem behind, like, why do people not talk about the experiences that they're having with police? Well, first, why aren't police being held accountable? Secondly, I found out the reason that is because oftentimes it goes unreported. Because everybody, not just black folk, just really have lost, not just interest in, but trust in a system that will see them, even when they report it, right? Every time a person submits a formal complaint against a police officer, it's a request to be seen as human. And last year in Oakland, 506 people did that, right? Less than 2% of them, in fact, had any disciplinary action to the officer, right? And so like 504 people asked for a government to see them as human and worth valuing. And that government said no.
Everybody ought to call him by his name. Call him by his name. Call him by his name. Everybody ought to call by his name. His name is Jesus, my Lord. Jesus. Oh, Jesus. Oh, call him by his name. Oh, when you're burdened down, call him by his name. No matter what you may be going through, call him Jesus. Yeah, 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 yeah. His name is, stay right there, say Jesus. Jesus. He's my friend, yes he is. When my mother died, I had to call her Jesus. Jesus. I want to take it home, Jesus. Yeah. I love calling on the name of Jesus every time I get in trouble. Yeah, his name.
Studia il passo, mio figlio, usciam da queste tenebre. Un senso ignoto nascer mi sento in petto.
My daughter, whose complexion is very similar to mine, doesn't really understand, because what she's been told about race is your skin color, and that is it. So if you are brown, you are black. If you are light, you are white. And so we have lots of conversations where I'm like, no, you're actually black, and she's confused because she's like, well, my skin isn't brown. Daddy's black. You're not. I'm not. And then I'm trying to explain to her, and then I'm like, actually, this doesn't make sense. Like,
yeah, I know.
You know, it's like
you get to that place where you're like, this is really hard.
The
to
way
explain,
we do race doesn't make sense.
It doesn't.
And I'm like, I'm trying to make it logical, and she's looking at me like, that doesn't make any damn sense. But to get to your larger first question, right? Like, how do we make like integration like something that we can work towards?
Yeah.
I mean, and thinking about
that is equated with education, quality education.
That would actually require a fundamental shift in, one, our views on race, and two, how we run and operate public schools. Because what the research shows is that white parents will say that they are choosing schools based on test scores. But when you actually look at where they're clicking online and how they're making their decisions, they're actually making decisions on the demographics of a school. So
that's true.
You can have a black school, you can have a school with very similar test scores, and one school is heavily black and one school is heavily white. They will pick the white school. And if the white school has worse test scores than the black school, they will still pick the white school. So we have to disentangle somehow 400 years of racial history and what automatically comes into well-meaning white folks' mind when they think about a good school. I got all of this response to my story with people saying, white parents saying, how dare you put your daughter in an unsafe school? Never in the story do I say that my daughter's school is unsafe. It is not unsafe. And I clearly would not put my child in a school that was unsafe. But automatically, because I said it was a low-income black school, people said, your daughter's school is unsafe. This is really
I mean, again, the parallels
fear,
to
right?
neighborhoods is uncanny.
This
it's
is
like neighborhoods that are predominantly black. Yeah.
So this is what you're dealing with. Mm-hmm. And as long as we think it's just about, if we can just convince white people that their kids' education won't be harmed, and the data shows that integration does not harm the test scores of white children, it does not harm the educational attainment of white students. But this is not a rational thing. And I think we're pretending that we need to approach it rationally. If we just give white parents enough information, but enough logical, rational data all of that in the world cannot overcome racial fear and how we automatically assume these kids are going to be rougher. That's what we have heard at our daughter's school. Well, we're just scared these kids are going to be too rough. My kid will be the only one because my kid will be white and be bullied by these poor black kids, right? Like, it's all of those things, and I don't actually know how we overcome that, except when white parents have also gone through integrated schools themselves, which means they had the opportunity to develop relationships with black people on a personal level, they are much more likely then to be comfortable living in more heavily black neighborhoods and sending their own children to heavily black schools. The problem is that is not typically the experience of white parents. Even when they're moving into a city saying they want diversity, they have not experienced that themselves. And so it becomes very, very difficult for them to then experience that for their own children, which is why they will accept, you know, a large number of Asian students who they do not fear, except that maybe they're smarter than their kids. They'll accept a significant number of Latino students, and the tolerance for black students is the smallest of all.
Misty, for you, you discovered Raven's existence watching a tape of the Ballet Russe. What was it for you to discover Raven and then to?
You know, when I entered the classical ballet world, being African American was not something that ever crossed my mind. Just from the environment I grew up in Southern California, which is very diverse, and I was very aware, my mother raised me that, you know, you are mixed, you're German, Italian, and African American, but the world is going to view you as a black woman. And that was something that was always in the back of my mind. But when I went into the ballet studio, I was just another dancer, at least in California. When I got to New York and I joined American Ballet Theater, I became much more aware of the fact that I was the only black woman in a company of 80 dancers for a decade. And it was something that came up a lot in conversation, and it was never something that came up when I was younger, at least to my knowledge. Maybe I was too focused on the work and oblivious to what was happening or being said. When I saw the documentary on Ballet Russe and I saw Raven, I feel like in order to know about the history of African American ballerinas, you really have to dig in there and do the research. It's not something that's that's just going to be lent
There isn't a book.
information to us. So it was kind of this shocking recognition that I saw in Raven that just kind of woke up this thing inside of me that was just like, you are a part of something. You are a part of this rich history that you don't know about. And it made me upset, and it also made me feel really powerful. And that was kind of the start of like, I want to share this with the world. I want to learn more about my history of, you know, African American ballerinas and bring it to the ballet world and the broader world. And Raven sparked that in me, and then I learned about Janet, and it's just kind of kept going. But I feel like it gave me a purpose in a way that I didn't know I had before.
When people approach you at readings and at book events, what have you noticed is resonating with people? You know, there's some things you know would resonate, but the things that you're like, oh, wow, you're pulling that out.
I think language and dialogue is something that people always comment on. And I have to say, it's been such like a joy to every reading. Black women will say, these people talk like me and my friends talk. And I haven't seen people talk this way in a book before. And sometimes it's very clear that like a white woman has like just finished my book and they're like not ready yet a little bit, and they're like, oh, I thought this was a little over the top or whatever. And every single time a Black girl will come to my defense being like, well, I thought it was really perfect, and this is like so it's been really interesting to see how Black women react to seeing themselves on the page, and that has been so touching, and it makes me so glad that I went with the agent and editor that I chose who didn't tell me to pull back on the slang, because some did.
I had a question. Have there been any like real pain points or mistakes that, I mean, I'm sure there've been many, but any like big ones that stand out where you had like a learning opportunity from it in building this business?
I wish that I had asked for more money. I think that as a as a Black woman raising capital from Silicon Valley, I did not have the confidence that many white men do when they go into the same rooms. And looking back, I'm like, exactly. I actually was in an investor meeting once, and I'm, you know, going over my financial model for the 1 millionth time, and I'm deleting cells and making up numbers, and I'm taking away my salary, and I'm talking with a woman who is also a Black woman in the VC world, and this very excited white dude is walking out, and she goes, do you see that guy? I'm like, yeah. And she's like, he just raised $3 million and he only has an idea. And I was like, but still, you know, I don't know. But now that I've done the thing and I've built the product, and we are a startup that actually is making money, which most of them do not, and we're making money before we even open doors, and we have this amazing consumer base, I still didn't have the confidence, and only now do I see that. And so when I talk to other founders from any marginalized community, that's the first thing I tell them, is to ask for more than you need, and you will figure out how to use the money. Believe me, it goes very quickly. So that is the one thing that I would have changed.
Well, the book in my hand are these sonnets by William Shakespeare, widely regarded as the Shakespeare of his day. And I would like to prove my point by reading a sonnet for you now. If you have your copy, you can turn to sonnet number 31. Sonnet number 31. I should be clear by now, I am a man of letters. A, B, C, D, I've used them all. That's just a little joke about everyone's favorite alphabet, the alphabet. I shall begin. Thy bosom is near, is shy by lacking insufficient, and there reigns love and lives a longing time. No, there's friends which I have forgotten. How many eyelids sink his tear? How dear it is as love's there. There's interest from the dead which not here, but things remember that in their hidden way. Thou art the grave where buried in the fire, hung with the trophies of thy living thing, who all their hearts on me don't leave to give, that do many now learn this time. Their dimensions I love thy hand here, and though they are so they. Forgive me, I forgot to put on my glasses before I started speaking.
Quickly I realized what I needed was space. Deduced the reasoning, seductive seasonings. Seduced to a truce with a rabbit I followed, deathly hollows and hallways. A beautiful fall day, sipping the tea that I brewed, steam in a tooth, hot on my trail, flame in the wheel. I'm a fiend for the juice, I'm a ghost rider. Chained to the work, put the work in. Yield no results, coming up dirt, make time for the roses. Noses close to the earth, close to the piety. Find me finally, finishing everything I thought that I had to, and loving myself. Loving to level up, get a buck. I found a money clip, I was in the woods taking notes from a ghost. You was trying to get like this, a little bit of what I really need. Leaves in a cup, universe screaming through the megaphone when the weather gets rough. Ain't no bringing sand to the beach, walls get breached. Walking on water in a well with a cap on a well. I'm a shell of what I learned if you heed. Peep in the dark, get it how you live. I figured at the end of the day that we're all trying to eat. 6 feet deep for the rest, but really do we ever make time for the sleep? I'ma keep a piece of myself for the peace. Heart got a metal coat so you can't steal it. You can faint the funk, but you gon' feel it. I found a money clip. I'm deep in the woods upon a cliff. I wrote another song. My skin get bitter cause my blood is sweet. That's what my family say. I prefer to call it an offering. I found a money clip. I'm deep in the woods upon a cliff. I wrote another song. My skin get bitter cause my blood is sweet. That's what my family say. I prefer to call it an offering. I hold on too tightly to the intangible and get tangled in ghostly vines that built this shrine. It's there that I host my best guesses and messes I'm too tired to clean. Leaning on pretenses, contextual tensions, tempers split and arouse. Building climax to bust it down, alchemy, how can I hold on to everything in the spring, in the fall, winter comes, summer comes. Choosing and swooping through falcon eyes, I can call anyone. If anyone hears, if anyone dares to cross the line like T's, dot the I's, no surprises like the fire. Gotta get it to run it up, sum it up, bum it out. Pressure comes, thug it out, tough it out, no amount of what I really need. Leaves in a cup, universe screaming through the megaphone, the weather gets rough. Ain't no bringing sand to the beach, walls get breached. Walking on water in a well with a cap on a well. I'm a shell of what I learned if you heed. Peep in the dark, get it how you live. I figured at the end of the day that we're all trying to eat. 6 feet deep for the rest, but really did we ever make time for the sleep? I'ma keep piece of myself for the peace. See, heart got a metal coat so you can't steal it. Look, you can faint the funk, but you gon' feel it. You gon' feel it. I found a money clip. I'm deep in the woods upon a cliff. I wrote another song. My skin get bitter cause my blood is sweet. That's what my family say. I prefer to call it an offering. I found a money clip. I'm deep in the woods upon a cliff. I wrote another song. My skin get bitter cause my blood is sweet. That's what my family say. I prefer to call it an offering. Breathe. I call it an offering. I breathe. Breathe. Thank you.
I just begin on the very concrete reality that I am who I am because somebody loved me. So I come out of Irene and Clifton West, and Shiloh Baptist Church on the chocolate side of Sacramento, California. And in that family and in that church, there's a musicality that constitutes who we are. So music is not ornamental or decorative. It's not something added on. See, I don't believe in this bourgeois notion of art somehow being compartmentalized. That art constitutes the very source of from whence we come. And it's the very means by which we, or at least me, preserve my sanity. And of course, that's always an open question as to when it's gonna kick in and when it's not, but preserve my sanity and my dignity, really. So there's a musicality in living, trying to be an artist of life as well as someone who appreciates those who are willing to give their big hearts based on a mastery of craft and technique to us so we can revel in their heart and in their soul to help us and empower us as we make our way from mama's womb to tomb.